What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Slate, a Thursday edition, filling in for Adam Kaufman. I'm joined by Matt Meiselman. He's also filling in for somebody. We're just subbing in. They had to bring the aces from the bullpen. That's what I told our boy Eamon in the back. It's like, hey, if you got to bring out the big guns, it's for this one. The NBA Finals are here. Golden State, Boston. I know Matt is all over Boston. All the nerds are. Every single model loves the Celtics. I'm going to go ahead and start the show with the fact that I'm picking the Warriors just because I'm a Lakers fan.
Okay. That's a valid reason. I understand that reason. Because if you were going to say you're picking the Warriors because you actually think they're going to win the series, we would have had to have like an intervention of some kind. But no, that's a perfectly okay reason for fandom. Maybe let's start with that, just like why the numbers like the Celtics more. This is a little quirky because we don't know the players that are going to be on the court for these teams to any like full extent because Robert Williams is still questionable. We don't really know what's going on with Gary Payton and Otto Porter and Andre Iguodala. We expect they're all going to be available, but as far as the playing time, we don't really know. So any sort of numerical estimate of this series, it's going to be a little vague because we don't know exactly how the rotations are going to function. People are estimating to do this math to some extent. But I think that we can agree, like the Celtics, as we talked about earlier in the week, have had a better season, at least from, the point where their players were healthy, and have also, I think, played better in the playoffs once you account for the quality of their opponents. And then we can talk about more specifics with the Warriors, where I think some of their players are pretty overrated, specifically Klay Thompson. But the fact that the Warriors are favored should not signal to anybody that the Warriors are probably going to win. I think the reason that the Warriors are favored is because the market has to adjust for what the betting is likely going to be, at least to some extent. Yep. And the Warriors being favored, in my mind, is mostly about the fact that most people are betting on the Warriors, and this is just sportsbooks balancing their risk because the Warriors are the public team. The last point that I'll give you that I was kind of saying this morning, I was on the Sweat with Julian and with Kaufman, where they were getting a little concerned that maybe the Celtics are not so contrarian. We're in a bubble. Me and you and all of the DraftKings people are in a bit of a bubble because we're like tied to the Boston thing. Whether it's you literally being in Boston or just we're on Celtics Twitter or a lot of DFS and betting Twitter is betting on the Celtics, we're kind of in a bubble here where it seems like everyone likes the Celtics. But I think in most of the country, people are betting on the Warriors. So let's not worry too much. Well, one, it doesn't matter. Like the results are not affected by who people are picking, obviously. But also, it's not true the Celtics are suddenly a public team. Most people think the Warriors are going to win the series.
Yeah, that's fair. That makes a lot of sense. And the way that, the Warriors, even to start out the season, it took forever for Phoenix to take that division lead in terms of odds. The Warriors were still up there for a good minute. And you even called it out at minus 180 for the Suns to win the division as being a good bet with value because it took so long for the book to adjust because the Warriors are such a public team. So going back to that public sentiment, it's been there all season long since they're pretty much healthy now.
Yeah, I think it's interesting just to think about how often the books have been wrong this year on futures odds. Like we had the Lakers as, I'm sorry, I have to do this every time, but the Lakers were literally favored to win the championship at the start of the season, or at least the Western Conference. I forget if it was the Lakers overall number
Nets
one.
And then Lakers, I think.
Right. They were close either way, but the Lakers certainly were number one in the Western Conference. And then the Nets might have been, the Nets got a bit unlucky with Durant getting hurt in the middle of the year, but I still think we can agree the Nets were way overpriced and they remained the title favorites even after Durant got hurt. So the odds are just not moving the way they should be. And then we had the Warriors also in the middle of the year when there were injuries to Curry and to Draymond. They didn't fall back. I still am going to say the Suns are a better team than the Warriors. That looks kind of dumb now because the Suns aren't playing, but it's been so strange the way the odds have just stuck with these favorites, these public teams, and haven't shifted the odds at all. And then on the opposite side, the Celtics were massive long shots for most of the year. So I think one thing that everyone needs to acknowledge is that the futures odds are not necessarily predictive in any way. They're set for market reasons, and then they also fail to move sometimes for laziness, really. Like, I don't know what else it is. I won't say that the NBA Finals line is lazy, because like there's nothing else to look at besides this series. This is all that's left. But I do think market factors are having a huge impact here, where the Warriors almost have to be favored, because you can imagine if the Celtics were minus 130 in this series and the Warriors were plus 110, like, and that's roughly what I think the line should be. But let's say it was that, every single person who bets on sports for the most part would be taking Golden State, and it would be a huge liability for sportsbooks. So like, that's why they can't make it that line.
Well, not only that, but if you go back to the beginning of these playoffs to even mention that the Celtics opened as underdogs against the Nets and just got hammered, because all the sharp money was like, well, this is a horrible call, and got hammered, and they became the favorites. Like it, and they had to correct from there. And that's the same kind of thing that factors in here. If you put the Warriors as the underdogs, you're going to just get hammered, and it's going to basically either go to like minus 110 each, or back to Boston being the underdogs.
Yeah, that's an interesting comparison. Like, I'm not sure how. I think it is worth mentioning for sure. The Celtics were, like you said, the sharp side of that series against the Nets. Like, from the result, you can derive that, but also just like, no one who understands basketball statistics really thought the Nets were better than Boston. I don't think. Maybe there's a couple outliers, but for the most part. So the Celtics being underdogs, yes, you had the sharps pushing that line. This is the opposite thing, though, because I think the sharp side of this series is Boston. The difference is just the volume of betting on an NBA Finals compared to a first round is so different. Like, we get this through the Super Bowl sometimes too. We're just like, the overvalued team, they can't move the line because there's so much public betting on that favorite that it's different than earlier rounds of the playoffs. So I think if this was a first round matchup between the Celtics and the Warriors, we'd see a different line, because the amount of betting from casual bettors wouldn't be the same. So if people are looking for a reason as far as like why the line is what it is, I think we've done a pretty good job outlining why it's different than other rounds of the playoffs.
Well, I want to also call out what's really crazy. This is just for game one. 81% of the handle is on the Warriors for the spread. For the spread, 81% of the handle is on the Warriors. And I would say probably the sharp bet here is still the Celtics.
Oh, yeah. Game one, maybe we get into this more specifically. Game one, we do have to care about Robert Williams. And like, I think that the current line at 3.5 for Boston is really good bet. Like, I think it's a few too many points, and this is close to a toss-up game if Robert Williams plays. If he doesn't play, then I'm just kind of curious what the line changes to, right? Like, I don't know if it sticks at 3.5, maybe it moves to 4.5 if he gets ruled out. At that point, then you probably just take the Celtics. So I think, yes, the Celtics are going to be the right side of this game to bet from a value standpoint, no matter what. But if you think Williams is playing, you can bet it now. If you don't think he's going to play, you probably just wait. So this is like, this ties into the kind of thing we talked about all year. Not every piece of news is the same. If he doesn't play, I think the move is wait for the line to adjust and then just take the Celtics later. If people are going to see that he's out and then jump on the Warriors, I think that's the wrong move, because like we've talked about, the Warriors are just way overvalued for all scenarios. And then if somehow we get Gary Payton, if they say he's not going to be in the rotation tonight, that would just be an additional bump to Boston, where maybe the most relevant thing, and I haven't mentioned this in all of my Gary Payton commentary yet this week, but Jaylen Brown's ball handling is like one of the Celtics' biggest liabilities. And there's no one better equipped to steal the ball from him than Gary Payton II. Like, not having him there to guard Jaylen Brown, I think that Brown's going to just be breathing much easier to not have to worry about that matchup where you get like Clay or Wiggins or Poole on him. That would just be so much better. So I do think Payton is specifically important for this series.
I didn't know how loose his handle was until really watching these playoffs. And it's just like, man, he would make this careless turnovers. It's like, oh, that's regular season. Like it'll shape up in the playoffs. But I feel like in the playoffs, it actually like got focused on, especially by the Heat, to just go every time he drove, just strip at him, strip at him,
Yeah.
just strip at him.
Yeah, to his credit, he played a great game 7 and didn't really turn the ball over. But for most of the series,
Because he didn't drive that much. Because he
Yeah,
didn't
I guess
drive that much, and he realized.
And Marcus Smart looked better, which is another huge key for this series. Like Smart being able to facilitate takes a lot of pressure off Brown, I think, because maybe a lot of what happened earlier in the series is that Brown was playing a little more point guard than he normally would because Smart's ankle, I mean, he missed an entire game, but also just he was playing through an injury. And Smart's not even on the injury report, so that feels pretty good. Like maybe he is close-ish to a. No one's 100% right now, but at least he's not on the injury report. Maybe he's 80 or 90%, which is a huge increase from where he was before.
So I want to jump into something really quick that I found just interesting. I'm looking at these. My favorite one, I mentioned it at the top of the Miami series to say, hey, look, like Miami to win game 1, Celtics to win the series. We talked about it. It was what, plus 500 or something like that?
No. That was a 220 or so. I think I'm remembering that right.
Yeah, so it was in that 200 range, which was pretty much value. What basically we talked about in that matchup was Miami to take game 1, Boston to win the series, but also to follow that bet with Boston to win the series after game 1, just as its individual bet, because the line had shifted because Boston was favored at minus 150 or minus 180, and then it shifted to like minus 110 or plus 110 or something like that. So yeah. I wanted to look at this one again, because if we think that the Warriors can win game 1 and the Celtics can win the series, that's plus 350 here.
Yeah, I don't really like this. And the reason is because I'm way less optimistic about the Warriors winning game 1 than I was about the Heat winning game 1 last round. And while it's true the Celtics don't have the rest that the Warriors do, it's not nearly as big of a differential as the Celtics and Heat had going into their series, right? Like the Celtics were coming off.
Yeah.
They were coming off 1 day off.
Yep.
They had to go from Milwaukee to
from was in Boston.
Boston to Miami, but they only had 1 day in between game 7 and the start of that series. And the Heat actually had like 4 or 5 days off. This series, at least there's a gap where both teams are rested to some extent. But the other thing, I think the reason we were actually talking about the Heat to win game 1 for that series was Marcus Smart was questionable going into that game. And then when we got Horford ruled out, which was out of nowhere, then that bet was really the perfect storm, because the Heat actually were the value side of game 1. Like they were under, remember how the line was 2.5 and it came back up at 4. And I was still saying Miami minus 4 was too low and they should be 4.5 or 5. And then the Celtics started off strong, but the Heat ended up winning by a bunch. That really changed the dynamics of that market. For this one, like Horford, we think he should be playing. Smart should be playing. Robert Williams is the question mark. So I think this is a bigger number than we had in that Miami series, but also the Celtics are, for all the praise I've given them about their probability to win the finals, they had a larger advantage against the Heat than they do against the Warriors. So I don't hate this bet at all. And if Robert Williams gets ruled out, I think it's semi-decent. But I'd rather just bet like Celtics to win game 1, Celtics to win the series, or just wait, like you said, just wait till this. That's personally like, it's tough because you want to manage your bankroll in a way where like you can not get tied up where all your bets are the same. Like if you believe me that the Celtics are the better team, that means that you're probably going to want to bet on the Celtics in every single game of this series. And you're going to want to bet them on the series line. And you're going to want to bet all the series props. And that can become very expensive very quickly. So what I want to do is like pick and choose, and what is the best way to bet them where you don't have to take everything. And to me, I think the best way to bet them is just wait till after this game. So maybe you grab a little on the series line now, because I think that's just a crazy price that they're underdogs. But I don't like game 1 that much. So I think you can just take the series and leave it at that, or just wait until after game 1 and take the series at that point. but I don't really like the idea of going after a bet specific to game one. And that is entirely independent of like any Celtics futures that I already have. This is just, if you were starting from scratch, there's a lot of opportunities to bet on Boston. I think waiting till after game one, because of, I guess, the travel differential really is the key. Yeah, that's really the main reason. And then also the concern about Robert Williams.
How do you feel about the data, which is Warriors have basically cruised almost every game one? They had that game one against Memphis where they had to come back. And then Boston, on the other hand, they've been in dogfights in every single game one, squeaking by to the Nets and that Tatum buzzer beater, but losing to the Bucks and Heat. How much does that play into how these playoffs have gone? Does that matchup data make any impact, or is it just noise because it's two different teams matching up against each other?
Yeah, I think it's noise, but I think we can actually say why. Like, we can say why this is being overblown. We just talked about this with the Miami series. That was a very unusual circumstance to have a team play a game 7 on a Sunday and then fly to another city that's not exactly that close and have game 1 on Tuesday, and then have a player ruled out for COVID, and then have the defensive player of the year also not play. Like, that game almost goes out the window. That was such a difficult situation for the Celtics. And then the Bucks and Nets are like better teams than the Warriors have faced. Like, to me, the close game in game 1 versus Brooklyn and the close game in game 1 that they lost to Milwaukee, that's mostly a product of just those being very high quality opponents. Whereas the Warriors faced the Nuggets, who we've talked about, were like barely deserving of a playoff berth. The Grizzlies, yes, are better than that, but not at the level of Milwaukee and Brooklyn. And then I also don't even think Dallas is at the level of Milwaukee and Brooklyn. So some of it is fluky, like it's just random. And then some of it is just the fact the Warriors have faced easier teams.
That makes sense. And that's fair enough.
So I don't believe. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just saying, like, this number also, the next thing that I was thinking about was just like when looking at the defensive statistics, both teams are strong defensive teams. And we saw with Miami and Boston where those games were going under. It started by going over. I was tracking this. First 3 games went over. And then after that, the final 4 went under. Do you believe that there is any value in the under because these are 2 such good defensive teams?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think that one of the difficulties in totals is just how teams will scheme against other teams with specific roster constructions. Like, to take 2 slow-paced teams against each other doesn't necessarily mean it'll be as slow of a game as you think, because one coach might just say, hey, this team likes to grind out in the half court. Let's just speed up the game. And we actually saw the Celtics do that in game 7 against Miami, where clearly in game 6, they had gotten stagnant in the half court, and they made a concerted effort in the first quarter to play fast. Like, it was the thing that stood out to me the most about the early part of game 7 was the Celtics really tried to push the ball. So I don't know, right? Like, that's the kind of thing I think you can pick up on based on what coaches say over the course of a series. I think for game 1, it's so unpredictable. And then this is even especially unpredictable because we don't know the rotations yet. We don't know if the Warriors are comfortable playing Kevon Looney and Draymond Green on the court together like they did versus Dallas, because the Celtics can really make you pay with a well-rounded offense and defensive attack, like in a way the Mavericks cannot. So rotations are unpredictable. There's injuries on both sides. We don't really know a lot about the minutes from role players. So yes, it's nice, the idea that you could have a bet on every market. I don't want to touch the total. Like, I just don't, I have no feel for it. And I have serious questions about anyone who claims to have a strong feel for the total in any game 1 of any series, but especially this one. Like, there's so much more uncertainty here than like a game 1 would normally have.
I when I looked at the totals for the matchup for Miami and Boston, I was actually very confident in the over in game 1 because it was a much lower number than what they had played at for most of the season. And that's what I was kind of using that data. And yeah, it's a little bit different because injuries and lineups and players were different and whatnot. But like, I don't know. Maybe I just got lucky for 3 games in a row and I just picked the right way because of how it was going. Because when they played, the totals were going towards 210 for Miami and Boston, and the over-under was set at like 202, 204, 206, 208, and then
Well, there was a lot of variability in that series. Well, game one, like you had the Celtics, probably their 2 best defensive players in Horford and Smart not available.
Yep.
So like from that standpoint, the over made sense. But then you had the Tyler Hero factor, who like we've spent all year talking about Trae Young and his impact on totals, like great offense, terrible defense. Yep. Damian Lillard to a lesser extent. CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram also have similar, like no one's Trae Young, but the point where a guy can be not as important for the spread as he is for the total. There are some players like that. I think Tyler Hero fits that category too. So like the totals were jumping around a lot in games 5, 6, and 7. I think a lot of that had to do with Hero. But that's also a thing to watch for this series. Like as certain players find themselves in or out of the rotation, that's going to change what sort of pace we see. Like if Draymond's playing a lot of center compared to Looney, that means higher scoring most likely. Like Looney is good for unders. And Draymond's a great defender, but he does like speed up the offense. And Draymond with Jordan Poole on the court versus Draymond with Kevon Looney on the court is a really big difference. So I think you stay away for now, but you kind of watch the way the rotations unfold, and then we can try to feel out the totals for subsequent games.
So I know these are not totally in your wheelhouse, but they're available for the finals. Finals props. I've
got some ideas here, actually. I may surprise you. I have some takes on these.
All right, let's go with some takes then. Points leader. Currently, Jason Tatum is sitting at the favorite at -125. He's currently also not the favorite to win the MVP. If the Celtics win the championship, doesn't it make more sense to take Tatum to win the MVP than it does to take the scoring leader?
Absolutely. So yeah, this is not the one that I have a strong take on. Points, I think, is priced like Tatum is a little better of a scorer than Curry, and then Brown. Like I think this is correct. I think Tatum for MVP is a really strong bet. But I'm actually looking more to the rebounds and assists. Maybe you have a different feel for this. Like maybe Jaylen Brown can have some big games. But I think the scoring market is fair. That's the one.
If I was to pick the winner from the scoring market, it would probably be Curry, because I'm not getting value on his MVP bet because he's the favorite -125 or whatever on the MVP. This is an attack on that bet not being as valuable, because here at +150, if he wins the finals MVP, he likely had multiple just nuclear explosion games.
Just for reference though, Tatum's points prop for game one, I have them sort of off memory. I think Tatum's at 28.5, Curry's at 27.5, Brown's 24.5, and then Thompson's 20.5. Maybe Poole's like 15. Poole's not winning this unless someone gets hurt on the Warriors. So that's really everybody. And I think that those numbers are going to be pretty, like that's going to be pretty stable game to game. So, yeah, like Tatum has a higher points prop than Curry does. Maybe there's more volatility in Curry's game because we're more reliant on threes. I don't know. So like maybe that's kind of what you're hinting at. But I think more likely than not, Tatum will outscore Curry in the series, even if the Celtics lose. It's just he's -125, so I don't really want to take that either. But I do think that there's value in both rebounds and assists.
Okay, let's go to rebounds and assists. Where do you see the value here?
So this number is actually not as high as I thought with Horford. There is a line on Horford +100 to just out-rebound Looney for the series. I do think that Looney gets game scripted out of a few of these and plays fewer minutes than he did last round. And I think also if Robert Williams is limited, that's more Horford at the 5. So I'm kind of just playing that with the Robert Williams situation. And then also, because I'm bullish on the Celtics winning, that also means that Looney, I think, plays fewer minutes. Because when the Warriors get down in games, he's not on the court. Unless Draymond's in foul trouble, which we saw a couple times this playoffs. But
they also went small and they didn't really even rely on Looney. They switched the lineup a bunch where you don't need Draymond or another big or whatever. They can throw Jordan Poole in there to sub in for Draymond.
Yeah, I don't know that they play too many lineups where neither Draymond and Looney are on the court. like with Otto Porter at center.
Yeah.
Poole coming in for one of them, I think makes sense. But yeah, like one of those two is probably on the court most of the time, unless a blowout or something weird. But I do think like they're comfortable in this matchup to play Draymond at the 5. And they're comfortable playing Draymond at the 5 like they did it most of the season. Looney only played in the low 20s in minutes for most of the year, except for when Draymond was injured. Other than that, like when they were both active, Looney's minutes were not nearly what they were in the Mavericks series. And it was kind of strange that he was able to play so much. I think part of that is because guys like Peyton and Iguodala and then Porter were injured. So with all of them back, like I think Looney is the one whose minutes could hurt the most. That benefits Horford, I think, in terms of like this particular market where, you know, if Looney drops, Horford's the next guy. But I do think Draymond to get the most rebounds in the series also is kind of live.
Yep.
Robert Williams, I am kind of concerned about how much he plays. So
would you say if you were to have, let's say, 2 units available to make this bet, would you say you would do like a 0.5 on Draymond and 1.5 on Horford?
It's an interesting framework for a question. Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Like, how would you attack it then? Like, because it's plus 900, you don't have to go up your full attack on it. Let's say you're making a bet here and you feel comfortable because plus 900 makes it so that if he wins, it's okay. You still make up for that loss on that Horford one.
Yeah, I guess I don't generally think of it in those terms. Like, I wouldn't just have a certain dollar or unit amount allocated to a certain market. It would just be, if there's value to some extent, just bet whatever. And if that means you've got to throw, like if Al Horford was 9-1, I would not be capping myself at 2 units for Al Horford at 9-1 to have the most rebounds in the series. That's just so much value. I would just go much more.
Right.
So it's not like I wouldn't be that binary, but in the context of the way you're asking it, I think that's reasonable. Like, yeah, I think a little like Draymond as a long shot is probably a marginally valuable bet, but Horford is really where I'd want to focus.
Let's move to assist then. Assist, Draymond Green sitting as the current favorite at plus 105.
Okay, so definitely not him. And maybe we should also, maybe this will connect to Showdown a little bit. So maybe we'll get to that after, but I think Marcus Smart is wildly undervalued here. Does that still say plus 300? That's what it was this morning.
Yeah, plus 300.
Checking because Smart's assist props are roughly even with Draymond's. I don't know if maybe we should check that for this game if that's still the case. Just their generic assist lines. But I think if I remember correctly, they have the exact same assist line for game 1.
For who?
For player, if you go into player props for just tonight's game and go to assists.
Yep.
Marcus Smart and Draymond Green. If I'm not, am I reading this wrong or do they have the same line?
Marcus Smart, 5.5. Draymond Green, 5.5.
And both are minus 140. Yeah, so why is Draymond plus 105 to lead the series in assists and Smart's plus 300? This is what I don't understand. One of these two things is wrong. And I think it's this market where Smart is this far back is wrong. Like, I think that's the one that's wrong. I don't know why it is. Like, Smart had a couple low assist games towards the end of last round. I think that's, well, there was one game in particular, he lost a bunch of minutes to Derek White, who was just dominating. And then he was also playing a little hurt, which was probably part of it. And then the Heat, I think, were doing a better job of taking the ball out of Tatum and Brown's hands, while at the same time, the Celtics were trying to get Tatum and Brown to score. So I think the series was just a little strange like that. But I do think Smart should be able to pick up a few more assists than he did. Like, he had some big games earlier in the playoffs. So I think it was a quirk of the matchup, but all you really need to know to see that Smart is undervalued compared to Draymond is they have the same assist line for game 1, and Smart's odds are 3 times what Draymond's are for the series, which makes it just makes no sense. So
yeah, because during the series, unless there's a outlier performance from assist from either Draymond or Smart, the line's pretty much probably going to be set for game 2 at the same number.
Right. Not every game in the series is going to be identical, but from the core starters, it should be pretty close. Like Draymond's minutes and Smart's minutes are both probably just going to be in the mid 30s, maybe a little higher, roughly speaking, for the whole series. Like, Daniel Tice could play a few minutes tonight and then not play again or something like that. But Smart and Draymond are like, those are integral parts of the rotation for both teams. Like, there's no reason to expect different rotations for them
Right.
throughout the series. So like someone messed up is what I think on this.
Well, no, I think it's plays into kind of similar narratives because these are kind of narrative based, I would say, props here, because rebounds leader Looney has been rebounding the ball crazy in the last couple rounds of the playoffs. So I feel like this is a little bit narrative based where you can play into someone's thought process and not be completely statistical there. And assist, Draymond's handing off to Curry and getting those free dimes in a sense, whereas Smart, Tatum and Brown are more in isolation than they are running off curls and picks and stuff. So I think this a little bit has to play with the narratives here.
I think for sure on rebounds, but on assists, I just think it's such a massive miscalculation. Like if that were true, why is Draymond's assist prop for game one not higher? Right? Like there's such a large disconnect here that I feel like maybe you could take this to say Draymond's undervalued for the game one line, but I don't think that's what this is. I think someone made a mistake pricing this market and put Smart's odds too high.
Right. So there's your value.
This is definitely my favorite player prop for the series. I don't mind the Horford one, but it's a stretch for me to even find player props. It's not something that I like that much in the absence of injuries, right? Like you remember the whole year we've been trying to find what's the prop if this guy is out. There's not a lot of that at this point in the year. And, there's none of these bad teams with unpredictable rotations, but I still think, it kind of surprises me that to see something that seems so far off.
Yep. Any interest of you in threes leader, or is this a Curry award?
Yeah. I mean, I could see Tatum winning it, but I don't really have a strong take on this one. Do you?
No, I just think that it's Curry's game. I mean, he's the best 3-point shooter in history. Like, why am I going to bet against that in a finals situation?
It's just the Celtics are just going to have an easier time getting looks, right? Like, the Warriors defense is good, but it's good in a different way than the Celtics defense is, where the Celtics can just switch everything and just contest every shot.
Yep.
And the Warriors, I think, they do a good job rebounding and they do a good job helping and whatever. But like you get Tatum switched onto a smaller guy, like he'll just shoot over him repeatedly. Curry doesn't have the capacity to do that. Like Curry's good at almost everything, but he can't just shoot over people. It's the one, like he may have to pass the ball more because they're doubling him or stuff. Like you can't really do that to Tatum. So I still think Curry probably wins it, but I don't know that I want to lay the odds on that.
Yep. Player to have the highest single game scoring performance in a series.
Tatum. Should we just go more Tatum? I mean, I think this one's kind of tough. Like this seems roughly fair, similar to like the series points leader. I think it's kind of priced in the same way.
Yeah.
So do you want to do a quick showdown look before we have to run here?
Yep. I got it. I will pull up the showdown right into the window.
That was fast. Nice work. Okay. So we don't know yet. As of 5:50 p.m. Eastern, we don't know yet if Robert Williams is playing, which makes this a little difficult. And what is just to check quickly, what is the Daniel Tice cost? What is his salary there?
Tice utility is $2,400. Captain,
okay,
$600.
That's not as cheap as I thought. I feel like he was lower than that last series. I mean, he didn't play in the games where he was the minimum.
His game
I feel like he was the minimum.
1,200, 1,800, 1,800 last series.
So at 2,400, it's not like he's some, crazy chalk, like everyone's playing him. If he's coming off the bench and playing 12 minutes, like you don't have to go crazy over that. So maybe it doesn't make a huge difference if Robert Williams is out then. Cause like, Tice at $1,000 chalk, like that would have been a difference maker. And then you could use him and jam in like all the studs. I think the most difficult thing for this showdown is figuring out how much Gary Payton's going to play. And we have no idea. Like, do you think there's a chance he plays 0 minutes tonight?
Yeah, I do believe that there's a chance he plays 0 minutes tonight.
Yeah. So I just don't really know. Like, I don't know how to give any strong analysis about him. Maybe we'll get more clarity on that before the game, right? Like maybe they'll actually say, but my hunch is the Warriors will not give us a real update. They're going to say Payton's available, Iguodala's available, Porter's available, and that's all we're going to get. And then we'll just have to wait until the game actually happens to find out if available actually means playing minutes or if it just means sitting on the bench and being a DNP coach's decision.
Yep.
I do think
Basically an
Porter is a
emergency in
lot
case someone gets hurt or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Or if they're just like, if they look bad and they can't guard the ball and they need Peyton. But I do think Porter is a lock to play minutes.
Yep.
Like I think they were being pretty cautious with him last round. Iguodala and Peyton were dealing with much more significant injuries. So I think Porter plays in some capacity, but I don't know about the other guys. But overall, as far as strategy, like I think this is a kind of difficult one, but I do think given Draymond's price, he's going to be the popular player from like the mid range. Like we know people are going to try to fit Tatum and Curry and Brown. Probably most people will probably play two of those guys in their lineups. It's hard to play all three, although I'm sure some lineups will have all three. But yeah, Draymond at captain or just Draymond overall. Yeah, you can't.
If you go all three, it's not too bad of a lineup if you put Draymond in the captain because of his multi-statistical contributions and then also steals and blocks.
Yeah, so I think for large field tournaments, my favorite way to play this is avoid Draymond. Just like this is for big tournaments where you want to take a massive stand because not having Draymond could definitely backfire. I think he's the best value play on the slate. But if you play Looney instead of him and Draymond gets in foul trouble, like that's that's a very direct path to having a high-end lineup. And we've seen that. Draymond can get in foul trouble. Maybe he gets thrown out. Maybe this is one of the games that happened in the Memphis series, right? Game 1 was the game he got tossed. That'd be great for us Celtics fans. But
what's crazy is that Looney is more expensive than Draymond. Like,
so Looney's ownership
make it that
if that's where you're going, the ownership is going to be so much more on Draymond than Looney. So
exactly.
It's purely leverage, right? Because like we said, I think one of them needs to be on the court at all times. One of those two players, maybe not 100% of the minutes, but vast majority of minutes, we see one of the two of them out there. So Looney, I think, is direct leverage off Draymond. Most likely Draymond plays a ton of minutes and Looney doesn't play as many minutes. I think that's the most likely outcome, but there's enough of a chance, I think, for Looney to wind up playing more due to Draymond foul trouble that I think it's worth taking a shot. I don't know if you have a stronger take on the top end guys, but I really think for me, this slate comes down to like the Looney Draymond pivot. And I think that could be a lot of leverage there.
Yeah, I believe that that's where it's going to be. The biggest question just comes in like, do you play for a floor play with potential upside, or do you play a stud in Tatum or Curry, knowing that they could potentially give you 100 fantasy points from the captain spot? Like that's the biggest conundrum to me, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think my favorite captain plays are actually going to be guys like Marcus Smart and Klay Thompson. And I hate saying Klay Thompson because I still think he's like the most overrated player in this whole series by a mile. But the ownership will be lower than the guys you just mentioned. And it will be for Smart too. And those are actually two guys who can, I mean, Thompson, everyone knows, can get hot from three and have a big fantasy game. It's also true for Smart. Like, especially when the defense is more fixated on Brown and Tatum. Like, Smart gets left open all the time, and he's not a bad shooter. So I think the contrarian captains might be those two guys. Because I think the four most popular captains are going to be the three you have on screen plus Jaylen Brown, right? Like, the three most expensive players and then Draymond Green. I think that's who people want to play. I don't think I would go all the way down to a very cheap guy to play a captain, though. I think there just isn't a guy here that I think is totally, I don't think there's enough of an appealing option in the low end. I think it's more like the mid tier above Draymond Green is where the contrarian captains are. So that's Smart, that's Klay, that's Looney. I think that's all of them.
Yep. That's good. Game 1, NBA Finals. This was a good show. Falcons at Jets coming up next on the Madden stream. But outside of that, any final hot takes that you want to give the people, since you've been on the Celtics all year and it's been a hot take from the start. Now it's not so hot. Now it's kind of all the nerds are on it, as Julian would say. But any final thoughts before we bounce?
Yeah, the nerds have been on it for quite some time. Final thoughts. I mean, I don't think the Celtics win tonight. I think it's a toss up. So like they are certainly live to win this game, but I do genuinely think the Celtics should be favored in this series, and I think they end up winning it. And
Ooh.
hopefully by the time we're back on here, it'll look much more likely that that's going to happen.
One note before we jump off.
What do we have?
Crazy big parlay for tonight that's been approved to share. 150K on the Dodgers money line and the Celtics money line at plus 281 to pay 571K.
I'll channel some baseball knowledge here. The Dodgers are just coming off of a 3-game series where they got swept at home by the Pittsburgh Pirates. So someone is very confident that they're going to turn that around. I don't know how that happened. It's the worst team in the league sweeping the best team in the league on the road, but I guess the Dodgers are due, right? That's what this is.
This is. But yeah, good show. It was nice filling in for the Cough Man. Thanks for filling in for the Reed Man since he's out on paternity leave. Congrats to him on having his baby boy. But outside of that, been a good one. Hope everyone enjoys the game. And we'll be back on Tuesday. All right. Enjoy the Madden.